Welcome, everyone. My name is Marc Boney, and I'm a teacher of the ancient astrological science of India, known as Jotish, maybe better known in the West as Vedic astrology. And I'm here today to talk to you about a particular aspect of Jotish, that is the use of one of the 16 divisional charts utilized in Jotish, the Dashamsha, that's used in particular for seeing events related to one's career life, the ups and downs, and also maybe particularly periods of distinction. And it's one of the more important charts that way because, of course, career and professional life can be a very important, significant part of many people's lives. So I'm doing this as a prelude to a webinar, half-day webinar on this topic that I'll be giving this upcoming Sunday, February 19th. More about that later. But to begin my presentation, let me pull up a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm entitling this webinar, as you can see, The Secrets of the Dashamsha. Maybe I'm being a little dramatic there, but I've used this word because what I'm going to be sharing here in terms of my researches, my observations over a period of now 23 years practicing Jotish, are things that I wasn't taught by teachers of mine or things that I saw or learned in books. And so this is why I've entitled the webinar in this way. But before I get into the Dashamsha per se, I want to just talk about the importance of divisional charts, or vargas as they're known, in general. And I want to do so by sharing with you this quote from an ancient Sanskrit text, Saravali, that was written in the 13th century. It was authored by an individual named Kalyan Verma, as you can see here. And the quote says, "The divisional charts hold the entire knowledge about the future of a horoscope, without which it's impossible to lay a step into astrology." So rather a dramatic statement, and it's implying that you really can't do much with astrology or make much progress in terms of being able to see events astrologically just on the basis of the birth chart or the Rashi alone. The statement's implying that one needs to have these divisional charts in order to be able to do this, something that I discovered is really quite true. And I used to hear my Jotish guru, K.N. Rao, say that without the divisional charts of Jotish, astrology becomes rather he would call it a crude affair, and would always emphasize that if he had an accurate set of divisional charts, then that enabled him to make accurate predictions. And I later came to understand what he meant by that. But having an accurate set of divisional charts actually becomes an issue, as I'll talk about a little bit. But why, again, would he make a statement like this? Well, when you think about it, all areas of a person's life happen simultaneously. There are things going on in your job. If you're married and have children, you have family life, there's things going on in that sphere of life. There may be events happening with regards to property. You may be purchasing a home. You may be, having a disagreement or falling out with a friend. So many different things in life are going to be happening simultaneously as they relate to the different indications of the 12 houses of the birth chart. But, if you're using something like a planetary dasha, Vimshotri dasha, in order to try to see these things, it has its limitations. Because any particular major period lord, say you're running your Jupiter period, it's going to be placed in some house, which maybe gives you some clues as to, some key area of experience during that dasha. And it's going to be ruling 2 houses, which will give you further indications that way. But of course, that only covers 3 houses of the birth chart. Whereas, again, all areas of your life are happening simultaneously. How then do you predict events related to the indications of the houses not covered? This becomes a question. And then there's even the larger issue of 2 people, like twins, identical twins, that are born relatively at the same time and are therefore likely, in terms of the basic birth chart itself, to have identical charts. How do you differentiate the difference between their fates, which is actually oftentimes quite different? And then, if you know a little bit about how astrological charts get constructed, the sign of the ascendant, or the lagna as it is referred to, it stays on the horizon of some, location on Earth for a period of over 2 hours. That means anyone born within those 2 hours in the same location, essentially, again, will have a birth chart that's quite identical. So the question becomes, how do we differentiate the karma or the destiny of such people? And when a person is running a major period, how do you see what that period is going to bring in terms of the different areas of a person's life? And of course, the answer that Jotish has for that is this: these divisional charts. So before we get into the Dashamsha per se, I want to share another screen here and just give you a sense of the importance of the divisional charts and why they are so important. So let me pull up a document here. You should be seeing a document with a birth chart on it now. This is actually a chart of no one you would recognize. They're not a famous celebrity. They're someone that I actually once worked with, a couple of decades ago. They were a work colleague. And one day when they came into work, I noticed they were looking quite distressed. And I found out the reason is that this was a woman. Her husband had just announced that he wanted a divorce. And she was, obviously quite distressed by this. And not right away, but down the road, she approached me because she knew that I was a practitioner of the system of astrology and wanted to know what the prospects were for her ever remarrying, something that she was, feeling pretty skeptical about. She was, I think, 50 years of age at that time. And actually, when I looked at her chart and the period that was upcoming, I told her, actually, if her birth time was very accurate, I thought there was a good chance of that. Because I saw that she was going to be moving into the major period of K2. Now, if we look at her birth chart here, we see that K2, one of the south nodes of the moon, is in her fourth house. Right? It doesn't rule any house. We'll give the results of the planets it's connected to, which is the moon here. And on that basis, a good astrological inference would be that the K2 period could bring some developments, significant developments with regards to fourth house matters, one of which is homes and property. And it did, in fact, bring about two of these. It brought about the fact that, a home had to be sold when the marriage dissolved. But then in her K2 Mahadasha, she did then purchase another home. But that's not the kind of event, of course, that she wanted to know about. She wanted to know about her relationships prospects, marital prospects during this time. So, of course, some of you may be aware that the divisional chart used in Jotish for this is something called the Navamsha, to see the karma, the unfoldment of karma, specifically regards to relationships in married life. And the reason I had told her, the basis of my statement that I thought it looked rather promising, was that you can see here that K2 in this division falls in the seventh house, something that in my experience would normally activate relationship opportunities and potentially even bring marriage during such a period. Now, I told her, I had mentioned that I would only make this prediction if the birth time was very accurate, because if I go back and show you the Rashi again, you'll see that the exact degree on her ascendant was 10 degrees 4 minutes. Well, looking at that, I was aware that if her birth time just shifted, was inaccurate within 1 minute, if she was actually born just a minute before, that the Lagna, the first house of her Navamsha, would change, in which case, K2 and Moon would no longer be involved in the seventh house, and the basis of my prediction would evaporate. But, her birth time did come from a birth certificate, so trusting that it was correct. And I mentioned this to her. And then, of course, it was easy to say that the sub-period, the K2 period, is one of the shorter Mahadashas. And the moon sub-period within K2 certainly held a very strong potential for bringing a relationship opportunity to life, even bringing marriage, which is what I had shared with her, something she was pretty skeptical about at the time. Well, as it turned out, the prediction proved to be correct. She did, in fact, marry in her K2 moon period. She had reconnected with an old boyfriend from her college days, and they ended up getting in a relationship and marrying. So I use this example. It's not about the Dashamsha, it's about the Navamsha, but it highlights the way in which, if you're going to see different events in different areas of life, you have to do this through using these divisional charts, which pertain to the different areas of life, and to see in each of them what a particular major period or even a sub-period, combination of major period and sub-period, could potentially bring. All right. So now I'm going back to my PowerPoint document. So the Dashamsha is a divisional chart, as I mentioned, that gets derived from dividing a sine of 30 degrees by 10, in which case you come up with 10 units of 3 degrees each. And I won't go into the intricacies of how this gets calculated and how it gets created, but just to mention that you have to understand that these divisional charts are mathematical derivations of the birth chart and have no meaning except in relationship to them. And all the classics of Jotish kind of highlight the fact that this division is utilized to see matters related to career, as I mentioned. Of course, the 10th house of the birth chart, karma bhava, has to do with one's activity in the world, therefore to profession and to career, and also to one's status and so forth. So this is the way in which this is used primarily. And it's also used to periods of significant achievement, times when you might distinguish yourself in life and therefore get honors and become more significant in the world as a result of that. And that can be on a very grand scale. Man becomes president of the United States, or it can be on what I would call an everyday, ordinary level, when a person gets a promotion, something like that within their career life or within their job. And one of the things that I discovered in my researches about when people did experience periods of distinction was what I then came to refer to as the special significance of the planets in the Dashamsha Lagna. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit. Of course, the Lagna of the birth chart is one of the most important components of it. I call it the pillar of the birth chart. It's around which everything else is organized. And this becomes true for divisional charts as well. And now I want to pause again here and start bringing up another document to start showing you some examples of what I mean. So, some of the examples I want to initially show you are ones in which a particular planetary period using the Vimshotri Dasha didn't seem like it was something that could produce this major significant development in a person's career life, but did. And the way in which, unless you saw that planet's position in the Dashamsha and its condition overall in there, you would have hardly ever been able to see this. So I'm showing you a chart of a former U.S. President, Gerald Ford. Some of you may be aware that he actually became president because of the way in which Richard Nixon, due to the Watergate scandal, ended up resigning. He was the vice president at the time, so he became president. So in his case, someone had to fall in order for him to rise up. And if you look at his chart here and the different planets there, focus in on the moon, it was actually in the moon major period when this happened. And if you're more of a beginning student of Jotish, you might be sort of scratching your head as to how that could be seen, because some of you may know here that the moon is a debilitation sign. A sign of weakness for it is a Scorpio, which is what we see here. And it's falling in the 8th house, one of these dushtanas or difficult houses that have a bad reputation in Jotish. And just on that basis alone, you would think that this period would be all that significant this way. There are reasons, some forms of special and unusual kind of Raja Yoga that I won't go into here. But when you see the moon's placement in the Dashamsha, then you get a whole different sort of picture. Here the Dashamsha Lagna is Libra, and now you see the moon right in the Lagna of this particular divisional chart. And this is maybe not something that every Jotish should do, but I feel it's a very valid thing to do, is to see the fact that from this Lagna, the moon would be the 10th lord in the 1st house with Mercury. And actually the best angle trine combination, the best Raja Yoga, according to Parashara Hora, for anything with Libra Lagna, is the combination of the moon and Mercury. You'll see that they're also aspected by Jupiter here. It gets Jupiter's 5th house aspect. And it was actually in the major period of the moon, sub-period of Jupiter, sub-period of Mercury, that he actually became president. And the point I'm making here is that that would be very difficult prediction to make just based on the Rashi alone. but actually becomes much more apparent if you understand this idea of the special significance of planets in the Dashamsha Lagna and how they can give significant developments in a person's career life. So another example I want to show you here, some may not recognize this name. He's not a contemporary individual. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when I was growing up, he was, a very famous basketball player here in the U.S., one of the most dominant individuals ever to play the sport. He was a giant of a man, 7'2" tall, tremendous strength. And he just dominated the game both during his high school years, his college years, and then as a professional. Now, in his chart, you'll find all kinds of angle-trine combinations that would suggest that he'd have great stature and great success in life. But if you look at the timing of when this happened, when he was active in his career, first it was in the Rahu period, which coincided with more of his high school and college years, and then most of his professional career, all of it actually took place in his Jupiter Mahadasha, which if Rahu is going to give the results of Jupiter here being in Jupiter's sign, but if you look at Jupiter, it's not part of those angle-trine Raja Yogas that are formed here, and is actually not considered to be a very good planet for Taurus Lagna, said to be a functional malefic there. But it was exactly in Rahu, and even more so in Jupiter, that he had this great success, fame, fortune as a result of his prowess as a basketball player. Now, however, if you look at his Dashamsha, you'll see that Rahu is right there in the Lagna with Jupiter, and they're joined by the Yogakaraka planet for anyone with Aquarius or any Aquarius Lagna, which is Venus. And one way to think about this is Rahu, and it's I take it to be its Mula Trikona sign following Parashara Hora, with the two best natural benefics. And Jupiter is said in the classics to give particularly strong results in Aquarius. And so you see here a very different picture with regards to the kind of results that Jupiter can give versus what's indicated just in the Rashi. So this is an example of the kind of things I started seeing over and over again that began to clue me into the idea that when you're running the major period of planets that fall in the Dashamsha Lagna, they can prove special. That's going to be particularly so if there's some promise in the birth chart. But even if the promise in the birth chart is not very apparent, as in the two cases I'm showing you here, I was finding it to be true. Another example, again, a name you're likely not to recognize. This is a person who became a kind of an overnight author sensation back in the 1970s. He wrote a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, Richard Bach. And as a result, he just really became quite a sort of a phenomena as an author during that time. And if you look at his birth chart, there is a combination in his chart that's given in the classics as being something that can give great fame. It's the exchange between the 9th and the 10th lords here, Mercury and Venus. But it was not in these Mahadashas that he rose up in life and became quite famous as an author. It was actually in his moon period, which you can see here is the 11th lord in the 12th. It's actually aspected mutual glance with Saturn, natural malefic, who's also the 6th lord here. So just on the surface, that doesn't look very good. Now, it does fall in an angle relationship from Jupiter, giving what would be called Gajukesari Yoga, but it's not really much of a Gajukesari Yoga. Jupiter's not also falling in an angle from the birth Lagna, which Parashara Hora says needs to happen. There's not the additional influence of the natural benefic here. I'm sorry, there is on Jupiter here, because Mercury aspects. But again, just on this basis, I don't think I would have looked at the moon period and said that something like this could happen to him. However, if you look at his Dashamsha, we see there again the moon right in the Dashamsha Lagna. And now, with Jupiter strong in its own sign in a mutual glance, again forming Gajukesari Yoga, and the moon's dispositor here, Mercury, is strong, placed in its own sign in the 10th, and it was exactly in the major period of the moon, sub-period of Jupiter, that he was a relatively successful author prior to that, but not phenomenally successful in any way. Whereas as a result of this book, he became so. So one more example here of this Mahadasha Lord falling in the Lagna. You see here the chart of Michael Bloomberg, a more contemporary figure, billionaire entrepreneur, who then got into politics. He ran for the position of the mayor of New York City here in the U.S. and became the mayor and served for at least a couple of terms, as I remember. This happened immediately following his Mercury, moving into his Mercury Mahadasha. And again, you can find some reasons here for that in the Rashi alone. Mercury here as a impressionable 12th Lord gets impressed by the Raja Yoga formed by the combination of the Moon and Venus there in the 7th house. But again, just that alone, I'm not sure I would have seen such an occurrence at all happening. But if you look at his Dashamsha, you can see here that Mercury is now falling in the Lagna of the Dashamsha. And, one of the things I'm going to be talking about in the webinar is this idea of, the question, does the idea of directional strength, can it be applied to divisional charts such as Dashamsha? And, my answer to that is that from my experience and researches, it appears to be something that does apply, in which case Mercury here has a good source of strength. And if you just look at his Dashamsha in general and the periods in which he was, hugely successful in life, first he first had his greatest success on Wall Street in his Jupiter major period, and then followed by the Saturn major period. And then, of course, this was followed by Mercury. And in the Dashamsha here, you see Jupiter strongly placed in an angle in its exaltation sign. Saturn, the 10th Lord in the 10th house of the Dashamsha, strong in its own sign. And then, come the Mercury period in the Lagna, which proved to be a very significant time for him achieving even a higher status in life. Now, this principle of a planet falling in the Dashamsha Lagna and how it can potentially be significant as far as bringing important developments in a person's career life doesn't just apply to a Mahadasha Lord in my experience, it also applies to sub-period lords. I'm showing you the chart of a famous Hollywood movie star, Matt Damon. You may remember him from the very successful series, the Bourne series, Jason Bourne series. He plays that character. But actually, he got his initial success as a very young person just out of college. Him and his college roommate, Ben Affleck, wrote a screenplay called Good Will Hunting that they were able to sell to Hollywood, and actually they were able to star themselves in that movie. And in that very first film that they were involved in, they won an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. This happened in this major period of Rahu, sub-period of Saturn. And again, there's more basis for this than we've seen in the first two examples. Rahu gives the results of Saturn. The Saturn-Venus mutual aspect here for anyone with Capricorn Lagna forms a good Raja Yoga. It's connected to Jupiter here, the third lord of the performing arts. So, what Rahu Saturn can bring from the standpoint of the Rashi can by itself, explain this event, but it becomes even a stronger indication when you see his Dashamsha, in which case, you see Rahu here. But look at the sub-period of Saturn. The sub-period of Saturn would be that of a planet, the Lagna Lord, strong in its own sign, in the Lagna of D10. And this is, in my view, in my experience, one of the major reasons that Saturn could bring the result that it did for him. So then, you think about the idea, or then, I started thinking about the idea of, well, what about the period and sub-period of two planets in the Dashamsha Lagna? Could that period and sub-period then really mark some sort of career peak? Again, that's more likely to happen if then there's some major promise in the birth chart as well. And this can be seen in the chart of another very famous Hollywood movie star, Julia Roberts, who some may be aware that her big breakthrough movie, the thing that made her a huge international star, was a movie called Pretty Woman that she starred in. And that took place in the major period of Venus, sub-period of Mercury. Now, Venus here, again, in the birth chart, does give a Raja Yoga. It's the fourth lord, angle lord, conjunct Jupiter, Jupiter the ninth lord, so that's an angle trine combination. They're with the moon, who's the Lagna lord, so actually it forms multiple angle trine combinations. And so the potential of her, getting stardom in her Venus major period was there. The sub-period of Mercury, though, just on the basis of the Rashi alone, might be rather hard to identify as to why that particular sub-period brought the stardom. But if you see her Dashamsha here, it actually becomes rather perfectly obvious where Venus and Mercury are together again are together in the Dashamsha Lagna. And again, think about the idea of Mercury getting directional strength in the first house. These two natural benefics are aspected by another one, Jupiter. And so what I'm saying is that the Venus-Mercury period, as being one of special distinction, was something that could have been seen, something that was predictable. I can't say I did predict it, but was predictable based on this principle that I'm talking about. Another example, a very good example, is of the actor Mark Hamill, who played the role of Luke Skywalker in the initial Star Wars movies, and he just became an overnight, hugely famous individual, probably one of the most recognizable faces on the planet during that time, because those movies were such a worldwide phenomenon. And here again, the Mahadasha where that happened, which was his Mercury major period, is a fairly obvious one as being one from the standpoint of the birth chart that could give such great success and fame. He has the best Raja Yoga for Sagittarius Lagna here in exchange between the ninth Lord Sun and the 10th Lord Mercury. And, there's more to it than that. Mercury is involved in multiple angle trine combinations, Raja Yogas and Dana Yogas. But the sub-period in which this happened was actually the sub-period of Jupiter. It's a beautiful illustration of a principle for interpreting a period and sub-period given in a little classic called the Lagu Parashari, which says basically that if a planet's capable of giving Raja Yoga in its major period, which is what Mercury had the potential for doing here, the Raja Yoga would actually manifest in the sub-period of planets with which it's making Raja Yoga, angle trine combinations, or in the sub-period of a natural benefic who gives similar results. So bear in mind that, he burst upon the scene as far as a movie star in his Mercury-Jupiter period. Jupiter here is not connected to Mercury, but it is a natural benefic. It's strongly placed in its own sign in the fourth house. It's involved in some significant yogas of a similar kind itself, meaning it gives Raja Yoga as well, since it's a mutual glance between the Lagna Lord Jupiter and the ninth Lord Sun. And of course, Jupiter's giving something called Hamsa Yoga here, one of the Mahapurush yogas. So it was actually in Mercury-Jupiter that this event in his career life occurred. But then if you look at the Dashamsha, what do we see again? Similar picture as in the case of Julia Roberts, a little bit in reverse. Now we see Mercury and Jupiter together in the Lagna of D10, and Venus, another natural benefic, is aspecting them both. And it was in Mercury-Jupiter that he got this great stardom. So this is what I wanted to share with you in terms of, I'm going to bring back up my document here. This is what I wanted to share with you in regards to one of, quote, secrets of the Dashamsha that I've learned. And my intention now in this upcoming webinar is to share more of those. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about this upcoming webinar here and what prospective students could plan on learning. First of all, one of the things I'm going to show you is how you do a quick mental calculation of a D10 and why this is important. And then, I kind of showed you an example of that with that first chart that I showed you, that where it was right on the borderline between two Navamsha Lagnas. So to be able to quickly be able to see such a thing, as you'll see, is very useful. And then, of course, focusing on particular is how to predict career peaks. I showed you some examples of a way using the Dashamsha career peaks can be predicted related to planets associated with the Lagna. But then also, life is not always one in which you're going up. Sometimes you take a step back. There can be career breaks in your career life. A person can decide to change careers. They can lose a position. They can retire. Sometimes they are forced to retire. So how do you see periods like this? And then, how to get finer timing when you see a period and sub-period that looks like a good potential, how then to use the third level, the entire dasha lord, the sub-period, to make that timing more refined. I'll also be, sharing my researches and observations about the application of yogas to vargas, something that maybe is a bit of a controversy in the world of Jotish. Some Jotish say, no, you can't do that. I have a different point of view, and I'll show you why. And then also the application of something called Dasha Lagna in this division. Dasha Lagna, again, is the idea of using the major period lord, the period of the planet you're running, as a Lagna and seeing the patterning of a chart from there and applying that not just in the Rashi, but in the birth chart. We already talked about the special significance of planets in D10. And then, a very interesting thing, in Parashara Hora, each Dashamsha, that is, each of those 10-degree segments, is said to have a ruling deity. But really no information is really given about what's the practical usefulness of that and what does it mean and how it can be utilized. I'm going to be talking about my researches that way as well. And then lastly, I quoted Sri Rao by saying, he said, listen, give me a correct set of divisional charts and I can use the Vimshotri Dasha and I can predict accurately with those. But if those divisional charts are inaccurate, well then, I'm really hampered. The problem is that of birth times being accurate enough to give accurate sets of divisional charts. And even recorded birth times can be, a few minutes off. In some cases, this could change, certain divisional charts that you want to try to utilize, like D10, to make important predictions. So I'm going to be talking about how D10 and life events related to a person's career, say in the past, can then be utilized to rectify the birth time, or at least rectify D10. So that's another thing I'll be sharing. Just to give you some, nitty-gritty details about the upcoming webinar, the date, as I mentioned, is Sunday, February 19th. The time is, it's a 4-hour half-day webinar, so it's from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is the time that I'm on here in Southern California, which is 8 time zones west of Greenwich. And the tuition for it is $90. I believe I've tried to make this very reasonably priced so it's not cost prohibitive for people. And really the only prerequisite is that there is a prerequisite. You need to have a good working knowledge of at least the basics of Parashara Jyotish, meaning, you understand the idea of houses, signs, aspects, and some of the, significations of each of these. But beyond that, there's no major prerequisite. And I just wanted to mention that, subsequent to the webinar, everyone receives really extensive written materials. Those of you who may have participated in my last webinar in December on Ashtaka Varga, the document that students then received afterwards is over 100 pages. So it's like a small book. And I do this purposely so people can further study the examples, further study all the learning points, because you don't absorb everything at once. But then I also record the webinar, and everyone receives a link to be able to review all 4 hours of the webinar. So this is, again, helpful in terms of really solidifying the learning from it. And so if you'd like to learn more about it, or even just to register for the webinar, I'm giving my website address here. It's just www.marcboney.com. And if you're interested in my full research paper that I published a long time ago on the special significance of planets in the Dashamsha Lagna, you can get a free copy of this by going to the website. Here, maybe it'd be helpful if I pull the website up here. Okay, you should be seeing it now. If you just go to my website and, if you want to know more or registered for the webinar on the Dashamsha, you just click in here. here it is. You see I'm giving it a title here, and a nice graphic. But if you also go to a different section of my website, which I'm going to show you here, there's a box on the home page that's, you see it down here, it's just entitled The Jotish Journey. And then if you go to this web page and you go to the bottom of the page, you will see that there's a link there that's going to enable you to download an article called The 10th Part of Glory, the Special Significance of Planets in the Dashamsha Lagna, some of which I was sharing with you here. So I hope to see you involved if it's something that grabs your interest. Otherwise, I appreciate your kind attention here. And as we like to say, namaste. Bye for now.